When we look back at major historical events, I think there is this deeply ingrained expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we really want the historical record to function kind of like a medical X-ray,
Right, like it's just black and white facts.
Exactly. You locate the foundational document, you line up the physical evidence, you cross-reference it with the eyewitness accounts, and then the historian just holds up the film to the light and says, there it is.
Yep.
The fracture is right here. This is exactly what happened.
It is a really comforting illusion. I mean, we crave that kind of binary clarity.
Totally.
We want the chaos of the past completely cleanly categorized, right,
Wow.
into undeniable structural facts that we can basically build our entire understanding of the world upon.
But the reality of uncovering the past, especially when you step into the arena of highly charged political history or urban warfare and just conflicting ideological narratives, is that the historical X-ray machine is, well, it's often deeply flawed.
It's messy.
Very messy. Sometimes the film is completely overexposed by propaganda. Or the machine itself was calibrated by whoever actually won the conflict, right?
That happens all the time.
So we end up staring at this landscape of information that is just profoundly murky. And today, we are going to examine a text that attempts to completely shatter one of those foundational X-ray level historical narratives.
Yeah, we are looking at the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters today.
We really are.
Because the source material for our deep dive today forces you, the listener, to question the very mechanics of how a historical consensus is built in the first place, how it's maintained, and ultimately how it can be challenged.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack a highly controversial book. It was published in 2026 by an author named Corneliu Munteanu.
Okay.
And the title is The History of a Huge Hoax: The Slaughterhouse Massacre.
Which is a heavy title.
It is. And to understand the sheer gravity of what Munteanu is attempting to deconstruct here, we really have to establish the historical bedrock for you.
Set the scene.
Exactly. We're going back to the dead of winter. So January 21st to the 23rd, 1941, in Bucharest, Romania.
A very dark time.
Incredibly dark. This 3-day window is known historically as the Legionary Rebellion. It was this violently chaotic, street-by-street clash for supreme power.
Right, between the fascist legionary movement on one side.
Yep, and the military dictator of Romania at the time on the other, General Ion Antonescu.
So it's basically a civil war in the streets of the capital.
A total urban war zone. And within the fog of this intense urban warfare, this horrific, almost nightmarish story emerged.
A story that became permanently embedded in the history of the Holocaust in Romania.
It did. It's the claim that during this rebellion, fascist legionaries took Jewish citizens to the municipal Bucharest abattoir and hung them, some supposedly while still alive, on industrial meat hooks.
And, okay, before we delve into the actual mechanics of how Munteanu attacks this narrative, we really need to set some strict parameters for you, the listener, regarding how we are navigating this material today.
Very important, yes.
Extremely important. The text we are analyzing contains highly sensitive, politically charged, and explicitly revisionist claims regarding a civilian massacre in the context of the Holocaust.
Right.
So our job today, and we want to be crystal clear about this, is not to validate Munteanu's revisionist claims. We are not endorsing his viewpoints, and we are absolutely not taking any political stance.
No, after all.
The historical consensus on the Holocaust in Romania is vast, and it is firmly established. Our sole purpose today is to act as your impartial guides.
We are just putting his specific arguments under the microscope.
Exactly. His archival documents, his forensic claims.
Yeah.
We are going to show you step by step exactly how he attempts to dismantle an 80-year-old consensus.
So you can evaluate the architecture of his argument entirely for yourself.
Right. We're just reporting what the source material says.
Okay, let's unpack this. We really need to ask, what is Munteanu actually claiming here? Like, what is his initial point of leverage?
Yeah, how do you even begin to systematically dismantle a story that has been universally accepted and taught for over 8 decades?
All right, where do you even start?
Well, you start by targeting the load-bearing pillar of the official record.
Okay.
For Munteanu, that pillar is a document known as the 2004 Final Report.
I know this one. This was an exhaustive document, right? Compiled by the International Commission for the Study of the Holocaust in Romania.
Exactly.
And this was the commission that was heavily influenced by the work of the prominent historian Jean Ansel, correct?
Yes, very heavily influenced by Ansel. And Munteanu notes that this final report is basically a monumental piece of scholarship. I mean, it's 424 pages of dense, highly vetted historical documentation.
424 pages. That's a massive report.
It is, but Munteanu actually bypasses almost all of it. He becomes obsessively, surgically focused on one very specific paragraph.
One paragraph.
It's located on page 112, and it's a paragraph of exactly 107 words.
Oh, wow. It is honestly incredible to think that an entire book, like this whole revisionist counter-narrative, is anchored to the scrutiny of just 107 words buried inside a 424-page international report.
It's wild, but those 107 words are highly specific.
What do they say?
They describe the Bucharest pogrom, and they state unequivocally that on the final day of the rebellion, 15 Jews were taken to the prefecture of Bucharest. They were tortured, and they were shot.
Okay.
The paragraph then cites a military prosecutor who claimed to recognize 3 acquaintances among the corpses.
Got it.
And then comes the crucial visceral claim. The report states that the bodies of those killed at the slaughterhouse were hung by the nape of the neck on the hooks used by butchers.
Oh, yeah.
It concludes by adding that a secretary to the government later confirmed some victims were hung alive to allow for mutilation.
Okay, so Munteanu's entire methodology is essentially a forensic teardown of those specific 107 words.
Exactly. He traces the footnotes.
Right, because his primary critique, really the structural foundation of his entire argument, is that this massive, authoritative 2004 final report relies entirely on a single, highly questionable source for this gruesome detail.
That is his core contention. He follows all the citations in the final report regarding the meat hooks, and he finds that they all lead back to a single newspaper article.
Which is just a bizarre parallel to modern media consumption.
Oh, well, completely.
Think about modern news for a second. If a massive historical commission bases its definitive, unquestionable conclusion about a horrific atrocity on a single newspaper op-ed, written 4 years after the event actually took place, by an active political opponent of the accused, doesn't that inherently invite a massive amount of methodological scrutiny?
Munteanu argues that it absolutely demands it.
Right.
So he identifies the specific article in question. It was published in a center-left newspaper called Corneliu de Minaye, which means the Morning Journal.
Okay.
The date was January 21st, 1945. So exactly 4 years after the rebellion began.
And who wrote it?
The author was a man named Ion Vladescu. He was a lawyer and, notably, a reserve military prosecutor. Munteanu argues that after scouring all the archives, this specific 1945 article is the sole original genesis point for the claim about the meat hooks.
Wait, really? The only one?
According to Munteanu, yes. Every single subsequent historical mention, he argues, trickles down from this one piece of journalism.
So Munteanu doesn't just dismiss Vladescu because of the 4-year time gap, right?
Yeah.
He actually dissects the text of the article itself word by word.
Oh, he tears it apart. Vladescu claims in the piece that over 100 people were assassinated specifically at the abattoir.
Over 100.
And he goes into extreme macabre detail. He claims victims had their bellies slashed open with butcher knives and that their intestines were physically pulled out and tied in nooses around their necks.
God, that is so gruesome.
It is. And what Munteanu does next is basically a classic technique from adversarial legal proceedings, right? He attacks the witness's credibility on other grounds.
Right. He doesn't just look at what Vladescu wrote about the abattoir.
No. He analyzes everything else Vladescu wrote about the 1941 rebellion in that exact same time frame. He wants to see if the man functions as a reliable, objective narrator of historical fact.
And I'm guessing he concludes that he doesn't.
Munteanu concludes that Vladescu was a serial fabricator.
Okay, let's look at the evidence he provides for that, because that's a big claim. Munteanu points out that Vladescu published claims that during the rebellion, the legionaries were fighting the National Army using tanks.
Right, tanks that were allegedly provided to them by the Malaxa industrial factories.
Right, and Munteanu pulls the actual historical engineering specs for the Malaxa factories from that specific era, right?
He does, and he demonstrates that the Malaxa factories did not even possess the capability to produce tanks.
Wow.
What they produced were these small, lightly armored infantry caterpillars, basically glorified tractors for moving equipment around.
So not main battle tanks.
Not even close. They were completely unsuitable for the kind of heavy, explosive street combat that Vladescu was so vividly describing in his articles.
I mean, it's the difference between claiming a rebel group had stolen like actual Abrams tanks, versus stealing some armored golf carts.
Exactly.
It fundamentally changes the scale and the reality of the urban warfare. But Munteanu goes further than just industrial specs, right?
Yeah.
He also looks at the human casualties Vladescu claimed.
Yes. So Munteanu highlights another highly sensational claim made by Vladescu. Vladescu claimed that he personally saw the bodies of Romanian soldiers who had been burned alive by the legionary rebels in the streets.
Burned alive.
Yes. And to counter this, Munteanu details his own exhaustive search through the archives of the Institute of Legal Medicine in Bucharest, the IML.
The actual morgue record?
Exactly. He looks at every single autopsy and mortality file for violent deaths recorded in the city during those specific days in January 1941.
And what did he find?
Munteanu states unequivocally that there is absolutely no medical or archival record of any soldier dying by fire or burning.
None at all.
None.
So Munteanu's underlying thesis here is really about establishing a pattern of deliberate disinformation.
Yes, he's building a character profile.
Right. Like, if Vladescu is demonstrably fabricating details about non-existent heavy tanks to make the rebels seem like this massive mechanized threat.
And if he's inventing stories of soldiers being burned alive to amplify the brutality.
Right. Then why should modern history accept his incredibly specific, highly sensationalized, and singular claim about meat hooks and tied intestines as unimpeachable, absolute fact?
Exactly. Munteanu is arguing that Vladescu was operating as a political propagandist in 1945. He was retroactively painting the defeated legionaries in the most cartoonishly demonic light possible for a post-war audience.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the original journalistic source is entirely compromised, according to Munteanu, the next logical step isn't just to look for other documents,
No,
right?
you have to test the physical reality of the claim itself.
Yes. If the text is a lie, can the physical universe prove it's a lie? This moves us entirely away from the archives and directly into the grim, mechanical logistics of an industrial slaughterhouse.
And this is perhaps the most visceral and detailed section of Munteanu's entire analysis. He leans heavily into biomechanics, the structural engineering of abattoir equipment, and human anatomy.
We really have to look closely at the specific language that eventually made its way into the 2004 official report. The claim that the human bodies were hung by the nape of the neck.
Right. And Munteanu approaches this basically like a forensic engineer. He points out that industrial slaughterhouse hooks are not generic spikes.
No.
They are precision-engineered tools designed for a very specific, high-volume purpose. They are designed to hang heavy mammalian carcasses, specifically bovines and swine, by the hind legs in order to drain the blood efficiently.
And the specific anatomy of the animal being processed dictates the design of the hook itself.
Precisely. The butcher inserts the hook through the gap between the tibia and the Achilles tendon of the animal.
Right.
The Achilles tendon is one of the thickest, strongest bands of fibrous connective tissue in the mammalian body.
It has to be to hold that weight.
Exactly. The curvature, the thickness, and the tensile strength of the steel hook are calibrated exactly for that dense anatomical structure. It allows it to hold hundreds of pounds of dead weight suspended in the air safely.
And here is where Munteanu introduces his physical impossibility argument. Because the human anatomy does not possess a structural equivalent to a bovine Achilles tendon at the nape of the neck.
Not at all. He argues it is a strict biomechanical impossibility.
Right.
The nape of the neck consists of the cervical spine, and it's surrounded by relatively soft muscle tissue, fat, and skin.
So just flesh, really.
Yeah. There is no dense, high-tensile ligament structure back there capable of supporting the dead weight of an adult human body, let's say 150 to 180 pounds, on a thick industrial steel hook designed for a cow's leg.
So the physical reality, Munteanu argues, is that if you actually attempted to hang a human being by the back of the neck on one of these hooks, the soft tissue would catastrophically fail almost instantly.
It would tear right through.
The flesh would tear violently, and the body would simply fall to the concrete floor. It could not hang there, suspended in the air as described in these macabre stories.
Right. And to validate this biomechanical theory in 2026, Munteanu does something that perfectly encapsulates the modern era of historical research.
Oh, I love this part.
He doesn't just consult a medical textbook or a doctor. He actually argues with an artificial intelligence about it.
He argues with Microsoft Copilot.
He engages with Copilot to test his hypothesis directly.
And this interaction in the book is just a fascinating psychological and technological case study. because initially, the AI acts exactly how you would expect a heavily guardrailed corporate LLM to act.
Oh, for sure. It gives him the standard politically safe
It
response.
essentially refuses to engage with the mechanics of the question.
Right.
It flags his prompt as a potential attempt at Holocaust denial or some sort of historical revisionism provocation.
But Munteanu doesn't let it go. He treats the AI like a hostile expert witness on the stand.
He really is.
He bypasses the historical context entirely and forces the neural network to strictly analyze the physics.
Right, just the material science of the steel and the biological tensile strength of human cervical tissue.
He forces it to run the biomechanical simulation.
And the result of that forced simulation is striking,
Yeah.
because the AI eventually concedes his point.
It does.
Stripped of its historical safety guardrails and forced to look only at the physics, the AI agrees that hanging a human being by the nape of the neck on a standard abattoir hook is anatomically impossible due to immediate tissue failure.
But what happens next is equally telling about how these systems try to reconcile hard physics with their pre-programmed historical consensus, right?
Yeah.
Because once the AI admits the physical act is impossible, it immediately tries to save the integrity of the historical narrative.
It pivots.
Hard. It suggests to Munteanu that the 1945 description in Vlodesky's article was likely a hyperbole.
A hyper...
Right, like a poetic metaphor used by the writer to express the generalized horror and degradation of the event, rather than a literal description of physics.
Wait, you can't just pivot to, it was a metaphor, when dealing with forensic historical documentation.
Exactly.
If a massive international commission states in its definitive report that people were physically hung by the nape of their necks, they aren't writing poetry. They're stating a forensic fact of murder.
And that is exactly Munteanu's response to the AI. He flatly rejects the attempt to hand-wave the impossibility as hyperbole.
Right.
He asserts that you cannot base an official geopolitical historical commission's findings on a macabre poem.
No, you can't.
Furthermore, he argues that this specific, anatomically impossible detail wasn't an accidental exaggeration, it was a calculated invention.
Designed for maximum psychological shock value and propaganda.
Is that?
I mean, it's the specificity of the horror, you know. If Vlodesky had written that the victims were impaled through the ribcage, or even hung by their actual Achilles tendons, it might be physically possible, but perhaps less viscerally shocking to the imagination of a reader in 1945.
Right.
But the nape of the neck detail, combined with the tied intestines, was chosen specifically to elicit a primal, nauseating horror, completely regardless of its physical impossibility.
And Munteanu extends this analysis of calculated horror to another incredibly visceral detail that frequently appears in modern retellings of the Abattoir massacre.
Oh, this is a huge point.
It is a detail that Munteanu points out is actually entirely absent from Vlodesky's original 1945 article, which suggests it was added much later as the myth grew.
Right. You were talking about the claim that the bodies hanging on the hooks were stamped, branded, or physically labeled with signs reading kosher meat.
Yes. Munteanu analyzes this detail not just as a physical claim, but really as a cultural and psychological one. He points out the profound logical inconsistencies of this imagery.
How so?
Well, the concept of kosher meat relates to the Jewish dietary laws of kashrut.
Which is an incredibly strict, highly regulated, and deeply respectful process.
Exactly. Kashrut requires a very specific, ritualized method of slaughter known as shechita. It involves a perfectly sharp, unnicked blade called a chalaf, wielded by a highly trained and pious slaughterer, a shoshay.
Right, it's very precise.
The goal is a swift, humane death and an extremely meticulous, complete draining of the animal's blood. Munteanu argues that the chaotic, frenzied, sadistic violence described in the historical narratives, bodies arbitrarily slashed open, intestines torn out in a frenzy, is the absolute antithesis of kosher preparation.
So, Munteanu sees the kosher meat detail as a later fabricated layer of macabre irony.
Yes.
Like it was bolted onto the original rumor over the decades to make the legionaries seem not just violent, but sadistically mocking of Jewish religious law.
It makes for a terrifying story, yes,
Oh.
but it contradicts the frenetic reality of an actual street rebellion.
It really demonstrates how historical narratives can accrete layers of symbolic horror over time, even if those layers logically contradict the physical reality of the event they're describing.
Completely.
Okay, let's pause and trace the logic here for you for a second. If the physical act of hanging a 160-pound body by the soft tissue of the neck is, as Munteanu and the AI eventually agree, an anatomical impossibility,
Right.
And if the original 1945 journalistic source is highly compromised by political fabrication, we are left with a massive problem.
A huge problem.
Because Vladesky wasn't the only one who wrote about this, right? Why did so many famous, credible, highly educated contemporaries writing at the exact time record the meat hooks as an absolute fact?
And to answer that, Munteanu transitions from the physical mechanics of the slaughterhouse to the psychological mechanics of a besieged city.
Okay.
He maps out what is essentially a massive citywide game of historical telephone. He attempts to systematically dismiss the famous contemporary memoirs that mention the massacre.
How does he do that?
By arguing that these brilliant writers were not recording eyewitness facts, they were simply transcribing the virulent street rumors that thrive in an information vacuum.
Let's look at the specific writers he targets, starting with Countess Rosie G. Waldeck.
Okay, yes.
She was a prominent foreign correspondent for Newsweek, and during the rebellion, she was staying at the famous Athene Palace Hotel in Bucharest.
Right.
And in her 1942 book, she writes incredibly vivid passages about Jews being mutilated at the abattoir and hung up like pork thighs, complete with the kosher meat signs. How does Munteanu dismiss an active Newsweek correspondent?
He dismisses her based on her physical location during the event and her information supply chain.
What do you mean?
Munteanu points out a crucial logistical reality. During the intense chaotic violence of the three-day rebellion, the Countess was effectively confined to the Athene Palace Hotel. There was martial law, there were machine guns in the streets. She did not casually stroll down to the municipal abattoir on the outskirts of the city to verify the facts herself.
So where is her vivid description coming from then?
Munteanu argues that her information came entirely from the hotel staff.
Like the waiters?
The waiters, the maids, the doormen, the concierges. And he points out that in 1941 Bucharest, the Athene Palace was a notorious hub of espionage.
Oh, right.
The hotel staff were widely known to be on the payroll of the SSI.
Which is the Romanian Special Information Service.
The intelligence agency, exactly. Therefore, Munteanu argues, Countess Waldeck wasn't conducting independent investigative journalism.
She was isolated in a gilded cage.
Exactly. She was recording intelligence agency disinformation that was being intentionally fed to her by informants disguised as room service.
That is a fascinating way to deconstruct a primary source. But what about Mihail Sebastian?
Right, Sebastian.
Because he was a brilliant Romanian Jewish writer, and his diary is considered one of the most legendary, intimate historical documents of this entire era. Sebastian writes about the slaughterhouse in his diary, saying, quote, "It is considered absolutely certain that Jews were butchered there and hung on hooks."
And Munteanu approaches Sebastian's diary with a really deep linguistic and epistemological analysis. He asks, what is a diary actually recording during a war?
Okay.
Munteanu highlights Sebastian's specific phrasing. Sebastian doesn't say, I saw.
Yeah.
He uses passive distancing terms like it seems, and it is considered absolutely certain.
It's the language of consensus, not observation.
Exactly. Munteanu argues this is the language of a man meticulously documenting the prevailing rumors that are sweeping like a contagion through a terrified lockdown city.
Wow.
Sebastian was watching the chaos from his window on Calais Victory. He is recording what the collective consciousness of Bucharest is saying happened, not what he empirically saw happen.
So his diary proves that the rumor existed and was terrifyingly effective, but it does not prove the event physically occurred.
That's Munteanu's argument, yes.
But then Munteanu has to confront Virgil Gergiu. Gergiu is the author of the internationally famous novel, The 25th Hour.
Yes, very famous.
And in 1990, 50 years after the rebellion, Gergiu writes in his memoirs that he actually went to the abattoir and saw the naked bodies hanging on the hooks with his own eyes.
And Munteanu dismisses this 1990 account entirely, framing it as a highly calculated, self-serving fabrication.
Wait, I have to push back here. You can't just dismiss a first-person eyewitness account simply because it was written 50 years later.
Right, bold move.
We know from endless psychological studies that trauma victims often wait decades to speak about what they saw. It takes a lifetime to process. Does Munteanu have actual proof that Gergiu lied? Or is he just assassinating the character of an old man to make his revisionist math work?
Well, Munteanu doesn't dismiss it solely because of the time delay, though he does find it suspicious. He dismisses it based on Gergiu's highly specific motives for self-rehabilitation in 1990.
What motives?
Munteanu points out that for decades, Gergiu had faced intense, sustained international accusations regarding anti-Semitism, and this was stemming from his wartime journalism and affiliations in Romania.
Oh, so he was trying to clear his name.
Munteanu posits exactly that. He argues that writing this vivid, horrifying, deeply empathetic account of Jewish suffering 50 years after the fact was Georgiou's desperate attempt to clear his own historical legacy.
Right.
By placing himself at the scene as a horrified witness, he was trying to prove his empathy to a modern audience, rather than providing an accurate historical recollection of his actual movements in 1941.
Munteanu views it as retroactive PR, basically, not history.
Exactly.
Okay, that is a deeply cynical view of memoirs, but I guess it fits Munteanu's framework.
Yeah.
However, the most compelling contemporary account Munteanu addresses, and honestly the one that I think provides the most profound insight into how the human mind processes horror, is the testimony of Philip Brunier Fox.
Yes, Brunier Fox is crucial here.
Because he was a highly respected, famous reporter. And unlike the Countess in her hotel or Sebastian at his window, Brunier Fox actually did go to look at the bodies.
He did. On January 24th, the day after the rebellion was crushed by the army, he went out to investigate.
He later wrote a very famous piece called The City of the Slaughter. And Munteanu uses Brunier Fox's own written words to dismantle the very abattoir myth that Brunier Fox is often cited as supporting.
Because of where Brunier Fox actually went.
Right.
He did not go to the abattoir, he went to the city morgue.
And the physical details Brunier Fox records seeing at the morgue are absolutely critical to Munteanu's case.
Extremely critical. Munteanu asks the reader to look closely at what Brunier Fox explicitly describes seeing with his own eyes.
What does he see?
Brunier Fox notes seeing roughly 20 bodies laid out on the floor. He notes they were older men. Crucially, he notes that they were clothed.
Clothed.
They were missing their boots and their pants were unzipped, which Munteanu points out was standard, brutal operating procedure at the morgue to verify circumcision and thus confirm Jewish ethnicity for the official records.
God.
But they were clothed and they were laid out on their backs.
So you have a highly credible reporter standing in a morgue, looking at clothed bodies, largely intact, laid out on the floor. That is his empirical visual reality.
Yes. But here is the massive cognitive dissonance that Munteanu highlights.
Right.
Brunier Fox's own physical eyewitness account directly contradicts the terrifying, visceral rumor of naked, gutted bodies hanging by their necks from meat hooks.
Completely contradicts it.
Yet, in the exact same piece of writing in The City of the Slaughter, Brunier Fox still repeats the rumor that they were hung at the slaughterhouse to drain.
How does that happen? How does a reporter see clothed bodies on a floor and write a story about naked bodies on hooks?
Munteanu argues it shows the sheer, overwhelming psychological power of a perfectly engineered rumor.
It just overrides everything else.
It does. The narrative of the meat hooks was so virulent, so psychologically overpowering, that it essentially overwrote the reporter's own empirical reality.
Wow.
Even standing right in front of physical evidence that contradicted the rumor, Brunier Fox's mind still integrated the story of the meat hooks into his understanding of the event. The myth was stronger than the bodies on the floor.
Which brings us to another wild, incredibly modern moment in Munteanu's methodology. He is back to arguing with the AI again.
Oh, this part is wild.
Right. He has dismissed the memoirs, he has analyzed the morgue visit, and now he demands that the AI provide official forensic proof of the meat hooks. And the AI actually pushes back confidently.
This is a deeply unsettling moment for anyone involved in modern historical research. The AI refuses to concede the historical point.
It doubles down.
It cites a highly detailed forensic report authored by a Dr. I. Falcoianu.
Okay, who is that?
Well, the AI claims this man was a prominent forensic doctor at the Bucharest Institute of Forensic Medicine in 1941, who supposedly went directly to the abattoir, examined the bodies on the hooks, and officially documented the specific tear wounds in the cervical tissue.
The AI produces the exact piece of evidence Munteanu claims doesn't exist. It produces the historical X-ray we talked about at the start.
Right. So Munteanu is taken aback. He has to verify this.
Oh.
He spends a vast amount of time doing actual grueling archival labor. He searches the physical medical registries of 1941 Romania. He searches the official state gazettes, the university employment records, looking for any trace of this Dr. Falcoianu and this definitive forensic report.
And what is the result of his archival search?
Nothing. The doctor never existed. The forensic report never existed.
The AI completely hallucinated the ultimate piece of historical evidence.
It invented a forensic doctor and a medical report out of thin air just to justify a narrative it had been programmed to accept as an unquestionable truth.
because its training data associates the Bucharest abattoir massacre with verified historical fact.
Exactly. When Munteanu demanded the verification, the neural network just probabilistically generated a plausible-sounding Romanian name and a realistic-sounding medical title to satisfy the user's query, all while protecting the consensus narrative.
It is genuinely terrifying. I mean, if Munteanu hadn't meticulously checked the primary archives, if he'd been a lazy researcher, that hallucinated Dr. Folcoanu could have been cited in his work. Then someone else cites Munteanu. And suddenly, an AI's hallucination becomes a new, heavily cited fact embedded in the historical record.
Yep, it gets laundering right into history.
It raises profound questions about how we verify history in a digital age, where our primary information synthesizing tools will literally lie to us to maintain the status quo.
Exactly. It forces Munteanu to basically abandon all secondary sources, memoirs, and digital tools. He realizes he has to go to the only unassailable, cold, hard data left from 1941.
Which is?
The actual physical files from the Institute of Legal Medicine, the IML morgue records from January 21st to the 25th.
This is where Munteanu believes the absolute, unvarnished truth resides, the mundane paperwork of death.
He goes through the official casualty list compiled by the IML during the rebellion.
Okay.
The official death toll of Jewish victims recorded in Bucharest during the entire three-day conflict is listed as 116.
116 victims across the entire city over 3 days of intense street fighting. But how many of those specifically came from the slaughterhouse?
According to the official IML logistical logs, which tracked exactly where bodies were retrieved from the streets, only 12 bodies were brought to the morgue from the area of the abattoir on Spial Uniri.
Okay, so 12 bodies from that area.
And of those 12, 11 were Jewish and one was a German citizen.
All right, so we have 11 Jewish victims retrieved from the general vicinity of the abattoir. This seems to confirm at least part of the story, doesn't it?
It seems to, yes.
But here is the critical, absolute turning point in Munteanu's forensic argument. He looks at the medical examiner's recorded cause of death for every single one of those 11 victims.
And this is the crux of his archival proof. According to the official morgue files from 1941, all of them died of gunshot wounds.
Gunshots.
Exclusively gunshots. There is absolutely no mention in any of the medical examiner's files of butchery.
None.
None. There are no slash bellies recorded, no missing intestines, no blade trauma whatsoever. And most importantly, for Munteanu's biomechanical argument, there is no massive soft tissue trauma to the neck or spine, consistent with being hung on industrial meat hooks, just standard ballistic trauma.
Munteanu then cross-references this medical data with early historical texts, right?
Right.
Specifically the Black Book, which was an early post-war collection of documents compiled by Matasius Karp.
Yes, he does.
Even Karp's own account in the Black Book states that 15 Jews were taken in a truck to the wall of the municipal slaughterhouse and shot by a firing squad.
Which Munteanu uses to point out a glaring, almost absurd logical gap in the accepted narrative.
What's the gap?
If, according to Karp's own timeline, the killers drove them to the abattoir, lined them up against an exterior wall, shot them to death, and left, who supposedly dragged the bleeding bodies inside the facility, stripped them naked, and meticulously hung them on heavy industrial hooks.
Right.
The narrative falls apart under its own timeline and logistical constraints.
Speaking of logistics and timelines, Munteanu takes it a step further. He argues that the entire premise of the legionaries driving these prisoners across the city is a military impossibility.
He builds a highly compelling circumstantial case based entirely on the military movements during those 3 days.
Okay.
Karp's narrative claims these Jewish prisoners were taken from the Capitol Police Prefecture by legionary rebels at dawn on January 23rd, loaded into a truck and driven to the abattoir.
Right, that's the standard story.
But Munteanu pulls the official military operation journals from Antonescu's army.
And what do those say?
Those journals show a completely different reality. They show that by 2:00 p.m. on January 21st, 2 full days before Karp claims the prisoners were taken, the police prefecture had already been surrendered by the legionaries.
Oh, wow.
It was fully occupied, secured, and heavily defended by Antonescu's regular army troops.
Therefore, Munteanu argues, it is logically impossible for the rebel legionaries to have been holding prisoners in a building they had surrendered to the army 48 hours prior.
Exactly. Furthermore, Munteanu maps out the geography and the military cordons of Bucharest at that exact moment.
Right, the checkpoints.
To drive a truck from the center of the city, near the prefecture, out to the abattoir on the periphery, a vehicle would have to pass directly through the Filaret barrier.
And what was the Filaret barrier during a state of siege?
It was a heavily militarized customs checkpoint.
Yep.
Munteanu notes from military records that all these internal city barriers had been massively reinforced with regular army units equipped with heavy machine guns operating under strict martial law.
So they weren't letting anyone through.
He argues that a civilian truck full of armed rebel legionaries and Jewish prisoners would absolutely never have been allowed to casually roll through a military checkpoint manned by the very army they were currently fighting a war against.
So Munteanu is painting a meticulous picture where the Abattoir Massacre, as a specific targeted event involving meat hooks, butchery, and legionary perpetrators, is logistically impossible based on troop movements, anatomically impossible based on biomechanics, and archivally impossible based on the morgue records.
That is his complete deconstruction of the official narrative.
Which brings us to the ultimate, inescapable question of his entire book. If the legionaries didn't hang these 11 victims on hooks, who shot them?
Right.
And for that matter, who is responsible for killing the rest of the 116 Jewish victims across the city?
This is the moment Munteanu pivots from simply dismantling the old narrative to actively constructing his own alternative historical scenario.
Okay, what is it?
And he points the finger of absolute blame entirely away from the fascist legionary movement.
He blames the state. He blames the military dictator, General Ion Antonescu, and the regular Romanian army.
Yes. Munteanu's core theory is that Antonescu is directly responsible for the vast majority of the civilian deaths during those 3 days of chaos, encompassing both Christian and Jewish casualties.
Why Antonescu?
He argues that Antonescu was desperate to prove to Adolf Hitler that he, and not the legionaries, was in absolute, unquestionable control of the Romanian state.
Optics.
To demonstrate this control, Antonescu declared a ruthless state of siege and a strict curfew. No one was allowed on the streets after 10 p.m.
And Munteanu claims that the military units deployed to enforce this, specifically the rural border guards and foot gendarmes who had been hastily brought into the capital, were given brutal, unambiguous orders by Antonescu.
The orders were to clear the streets of any resistance and to shoot without hesitation.
You really have to picture the environment Munteanu is describing here, because 1941 Bucharest was not a brightly lit modern metropolis with surveillance cameras.
Not at all.
It was extremely poorly lit, relying on sparse, low-wattage bulbs, and many peripheral areas, like the Abattoir district, had no electricity or streetlights at all. It was a blackout.
And critically, as Munteanu points out, Jews in Romania at this specific time in January 1941 did not wear yellow stars.
Right.
There were no distinguishing marks on their clothing to identify their ethnicity in the dark.
So Munteanu argues that when these tense, heavily armed soldiers were firing machine guns down pitch-black streets and into chaotic crowds to crush the rebellion, they were firing completely indiscriminately.
Completely.
In the chaos and the dark, a terrified rural gendarme couldn't differentiate between an armed legionary rebel, a Christian civilian caught walking home past curfew, or a Jewish civilian.
Therefore, Munteanu views the 116 Jewish deaths not as a targeted, ideologically driven, meticulously planned pogrom orchestrated by the legionaries at an abattoir, but as the tragic, indiscriminate collateral damage of a ruthless military dictator using heavy army ordnance to crush a political rebellion in the dark streets of a densely populated city.
It completely changes the nature of the crime from a targeted hate crime to state-sponsored indiscriminate slaughter.
It does.
But that leaves a massive, glaring psychological question that Munteanu absolutely has to answer for his theory to hold any water at all.
The question of origin.
Right. If the army just shot people indiscriminately in the street, why invent something so incredibly specific, so wildly macabre, and so gruesome as hanging Jews on meat hooks?
Exactly.
Where does the specific architecture of that lie come from? Who benefits from that imagery?
Munteanu lays the invention of this horrific story squarely at the feet of the SSI, the Special Information Service, and its brilliant, ruthless director, Eugen Cristescu.
The intelligence agency fabricated it. But why?
Munteanu argues it was a matter of pure political survival. As the sheer scale of the civilian death toll became apparent over those 3 days of military crackdown, General Antonescu and Cristescu realized they had a massive crisis on their hands.
Oh, they had to cover it up.
They needed to justify the carnage to the Romanian public and, crucially, to their German allies. They could not possibly admit the truth, that the glorious, disciplined Romanian army had just spent 3 days indiscriminately slaughtering over 100 innocent, unarmed civilians in the streets.
They needed a scapegoat. And they needed a distraction so massive that no one would look at the bullet holes.
Precisely. Munteanu argues that the SSI, which specialized in psychological warfare and black propaganda, intentionally engineered and launched the abattoir rumor.
It was essentially a 1940s analog to a modern-day DDoS attack on public attention.
That's a great way to put it.
You flood the information ecosystem with data so sensational, so macabre, and so terrifying that it crashes the public's ability to focus on the mundane reality of the Army's gunfire.
And they seeded it directly into the intelligence supply chain. They fed it to their informants. The waiters at the Athene Palace, the hotel staff, the concierges, knowing these people, would whisper it to foreign journalists like Countess Waldeck.
And that it would spread like wildfire through a terrified populace.
Exactly. And Munteanu argues they included the highly visceral, unforgettable imagery, the industrial butcher hooks, the kosher meat signs, the torn intestines for a very specific, calculated psychological reason.
To completely demonize the legionaries.
Yes. By painting the defeated legionaries not just as political rebels who lost a power struggle, but as bloodthirsty, sadistic, inhuman beasts capable of unimaginable butchery, the SSI successfully diverted all public outrage.
And ultimately all historical blame.
Away from the military dictatorship's own indiscriminate violence. The sheer, overwhelming horror of the meat hook story provided the perfect, enduring smokescreen for the Army's bullets.
Wow, that is a lot to process. Let's take a breath and recap the incredible winding journey this book has taken us on.
It's been a lot.
We have been exploring Corneliu Munteanu's highly controversial 2026 text, The History of a Huge Hoax. We have walked step by step through his methodology.
His claim that the definitive 2004 final report relied on a single fabricated 1945 op-ed by a political rival.
His biomechanical argument that hanging a human by the soft tissue of the neck on a bovine meat hook is anatomically impossible.
His epistemological argument that the famous wartime memoirs were merely recording intelligence agency rumors, not facts.
We looked at the terrifying reality of AI hallucinating forensic doctors to protect a consensus.
And we examined his claim that the official morgue records show victims died only of gunshot wounds.
Leading to his ultimate conclusion, that the entire abattoir narrative was a brilliant, evil cover-up designed by the SSI to hide the fact that General Antonescu's army slaughtered innocent civilians in the dark.
It is a staggering counter-narrative, but we must reiterate to you, our listener, the boundaries of our exploration today.
Yes, very importantly.
While Munteanu presents a highly detailed, aggressively argued, and archivally sourced case, our role has simply been to explore the architecture of his text. The historical consensus regarding the legionary violence remains firmly established in the opposite direction.
We are leaving the final judgment of Munteanu's claims, his methodology, and his conclusions entirely up to you.
But Munteanu doesn't just end his book with a geopolitical theory about the SSI. He doesn't just leave it in the archives.
No, he doesn't.
He ends it with a physical, tangible challenge to the modern world. And it's a thought we want to leave you with today.
Munteanu claims that the absolute, undeniable physical truth of what happened in January 1941 doesn't live in a history book. It doesn't live in a biased archive, and it certainly doesn't live in an AI's memory bank.
He claims the truth is currently buried in the cold ground at the Philanthropia Cemetery in Bucharest.
Because those 116 Jewish victims, retrieved from the streets and the morgues, were buried during a chaotic, terrifying time, hastily and without complete modern autopsies.
Exactly. Which means the physical instruments of their death, the bullets that killed them, are still in the graves with them.
Wow.
Munteanu poses this final, audacious challenge. He argues that a modern forensic exhumation and a basic ballistic analysis of those bullets would solve this 80-year-old mystery instantly and forever.
Because of the calibers.
Because of the calibers. If the bullets found in the bones of the victims at Philanthropia Cemetery are 7.92 millimeter Mauser rifle bullets, they were fired by the regular Army's heavy weapons, proving Antonescu's guilt.
And if they aren't?
If, however, they are 7.65 millimeter pistol bullets, they were fired by the smaller sidearms carried by the legionary rebels.
It all comes back to that X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
It really does.
We desperately want to believe history is clean, though we can see the jagged fractures of the past clearly through our textbooks and reports. But we live in an increasingly complex era where artificial intelligence can confidently hallucinate official historical documents.
And where 80-year-old narratives, regardless of their origin, dictate national identity, reparations, and geopolitical truths.
The profound question Munteanu leaves us with is this. If we suspect the historical X-ray is broken, if we suspect the machine was rigged by the victors, would we ever actually be bold enough or politically prepared enough to literally dig up the physical past to see if the bones in the ground match the stories we've been told?
So quite a question to leave with.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.